Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about what to side against the Ishizu Tearlaments. Um, I originally wasn't gonna make this because I usually focus on like tier 2, tier 1 decks that people don't think you need to do these type of videos for. But then I actually searched for this and I couldn't find it. So I actually that's not true. That's not true. There's Cheaper Reaper Gaming posted this 2 weeks ago. I didn't actually check that video out. Shadow Rabbit Yu-Gi-Oh also did this. There's actually a card that she talked about that I was gonna talk about. MST.TV, doing MST.TV, but really like not as many as I would think. Like if we just go to some random deck like this, um, I feel like there's a lot more here. So as you can see at the top of the screen, we got a lot of tabs. Obviously, we got a lot to talk to today. So make sure you guys click that like button and subscribe button so you guys don't miss out on this. If there is a deck that you want me to feature here, we haven't done this in a while. I think the last deck we did was Heroes. Any deck, I will take a look at it. If you suggest a deck that I'm not too familiar with, it might take a little longer. But if you suggest a deck that I'm very familiar with, I'll probably post it just like the next day, right? But this is what to decide against Tearlaments Ishizu. We are in a tier 0 format, so you're gonna want to know what these cards can do. I'm gonna kind of rattle off the first few cards very quickly, just simply because they're obvious. Because Tearlaments, what they like to do is this. They like to basically, if you're familiar with Light Swarm, it's like that but better. They like to mill, fusion summon and mill, and then use the cards that got milled to do some interesting effects. Whether it's interact with their opponent's graveyard, whether it's fusion summon into crazy monsters, special summon into other monsters, etc. Right? Also, what Ishizu really likes to do well is it's like very similar to a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh decks in the most recent years. When we look at Yu-Gi-Oh as a card game, decks are usually designed three different ways. Whether it's like an aggro heavy deck where we don't really care too much about what they do, they're just big monsters and we summon them. It's a stun heavy deck where we don't really summon too many monsters, we just stun, and if they can't play, we can't play, nobody can play. Um, and then the final one is a combo heavy deck where we're comboing off and doing this crazy cool combo to win. That's usually like the three main styles of card in card games. That's usually the three main styles. Now Yu-Gi-Oh usually is like an aggro-ish deck. Most great Yu-Gi-Oh decks are aggro-ish that are very easy combos that turn into stun, right? It's mostly a stun type deck. The deck itself, Ishizu Tearlaments, really what they're trying to do, they're trying to build up into certain things, right? And they do that by utilizing probably the most powerful resource in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Like, I think the first, I mean, you look at the Go format decks, most good Go format decks are what? Banished base decks where you were banishing Thunder Dragon and DD Warrior Lady for a Blackluster Soldier, right? That was 17 years ago, and still today, the graveyard is the most powerful resource other than like our hand in the entire game, and sometimes even more powerful than our hand, like in the case of Ishizu Tearlaments, right? So that's why cards like Necro Valley, Banisher of the Light, Silent Graveyard, used to be called Forbidden Graveyard, um, Dimension Shifter, DD Crow, Banisher of the Radiance, Macrocosmos, Earth Shattering Event. I actually forgot that this card existed, but the Shadow Rabbit Yu-Gi-Oh channel that I was talking about, she talked about this card. There's actually a good amount of cards that are like this. The Bistio cards just recently came out. They have to special summon themselves by banishing from either graveyard, right? Invocation can banish from either graveyard. Dimensional Shifter, Different Dimension Ground, Herald of the Arclight. I'm assuming you guys know what these cards do, right? And then the reason why I'm saying that is because these are really like, these are the first few cards that come to mind. I mean, the last card we're going to talk about in this list is Abyss Dweller. Like, these should be the first cards that come to mind when you think of a graveyard heavy deck, right? And I really don't want to spend this video talking about that because I feel like that's a lot of the other videos that I saw, even though there weren't too many of them. Of the videos that I did see, these are the cards that we're focusing on. And by all means, you play D Shifter and summon Abyss Dweller. Hashtag shout out Crystal Beasts, because they can do that actually pretty well. They can play D Shifter, go Pegasus, get the new Crystal Beast, Rainbow Dragon, summon a Topaz Tiger, or just summon a Sapphire Pegasus, make Dweller. Right? Shout out Crystal Beast. You're going to be in a good spot, though, against Tearlaments. You are, if you're able to do that. But here's the thing. And this is something to keep in mind. Good Tearlament players, like at a regional, even at your top cut in locals. Like I've been to certain locals where the best players are pretty freaking good. YCS winners, regional winners go to my locals, right? They're going to be ready for this. They're going to be ready for Silent Graveyard, which says discard one card. Your opponent can't activate. Negate all activated effects in the graveyard, right? Or Abyss Dweller, right? You get attachment material for this card. Your opponent can activate card effects in their graveyard for the rest of this turn, right? Or Dimension Shifter. Every card is banished. So they have contingencies plans for that, right? There are cards, the rest of the cards I'm going to talk about here aren't really like that, right? So just banish. Just if you can banish, if you can turn off the graveyard, if you turn off the graveyard by banishing, if you turn off the graveyard by a card effect like Earth Shattering Event, or if you can banish with Bestial or DD Crow, right? There's another card like Skullmeister. That's another pretty solid one. Not a lot of people think about that card, or like Banisher of the Light or Banisher of the Radiance. Everything like that, right? It's not really that great against like Imperial Iron Wall or Artifact Lancia. Like those cards aren't that good. This deck doesn't really care too much about banishing, right? So what you're trying to do, that's why we saw at the YCS over the weekend, Floowandereeze did so well. I don't think Floowandereeze as a deck is that solid, right? But Sprite is the same way. I don't think Sprite is that solid compared to Ishizu Tearlaments. But what it does do, it can play D Shifter. It can play under D Shifter a lot better than Tearlaments, right? So this, if you've only seen this far of the video, right, that's fine. Like you're still you've heard all you need to hear. Just banish their graveyard, turn off the graveyard. You can click the video off if you'd like to at this point. But there are some other cards I really like to talk about, because in watching duels for Ishizu Tearlaments and playtesting Tearlaments myself, I noticed that the deck would struggle under certain things, and I don't see a lot of people playing that, right? So the first thing I want to talk about is the Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode, right? Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode piggybacks off of Lava Golem, which even piggybacks off of any kaiju. I mean, this is just the first one that came up on the database, right? So a lot of times they're going to summon their own Abyss Dweller, and then a Baron de Fleur, maybe an Apollousa, just, any other form of disruption that they might be running. A Winda. And what's cool about Lava Golem, Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode, Doggeran, or any kaiju, is that they tribute those monsters off without doing anything. So like they can't, it's not like they activated an effect to do it. Like Nibiru, for example, right? Which we'll actually be talking about in a second. Nibiru is an effect, so that can be negated, right? You can't negate the Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode, right? And because of the way Dark Rule No More is worded, they can't negate that either. So if we're able to play Dark Rule No More or a Sphere mode, the issue though here is these are really only good going second. They're not super fantastic going first, right? Another card that comes to mind is a card like Forbidden Droplets or a card like Super Polymerization. Any card that's going to stop our opponent from playing, or that's going to get rid of our opponent's monsters, that also, like Droplets, Dark Rule No More, and like not really Lightning Storm or Regeki or Dark Hole as much, but Droplets, Dark Rule No More, and Super Poly, our opponents can't even respond to it. So we play these cards, board wipe, and move forward. Now Super Poly is a little tricky, because you got to make sure you're running targets for it. And like obviously decks like Invoked, Elemental Heroes, Branded, they can do it, but a deck like Math Mech might not have room for it. So lean more towards Droplet. Dark Rule No Mores are super cheap, so you won't have to worry too much about that. But those are really solid going second cards. And once again, okay, here's the unfortunate truth, right? This deck is really good. If you're going second against this deck, odds are you're going to lose. If you don't open D Shifter, you're probably gonna lose, right? Um, so I don't really want to focus too much on going second cards. Nibiru is a solid card, right? And this actually just brings up an interesting point that I wanted to talk about. Um, Ishizu Tearlaments is not the easiest deck to play. There have been certain decks that have been as powerful as Ishizu Tearlaments that are very forgiving with how you play them, right? I go all the way back to like Pepe, for example. Everything was like a level 4. Everything had like 2 or 3 crazy effects. It was very easy to play Pepe, very easy to build Pepe, right? Or even like Zodiac. Zodiac has always been relatively of an easy strategy. I know Zodiac players are like, no, it's not that. No, it's a really, especially with Broad Bull, 3 Rat, 3 Barrage, Elder Entity Norden, 3 Instant Fusion. It was a really easy strategy to play. Animancipators were kind of like that. Not like a lot, but I would even argue like Animancipator is easier than a Shizu Tearlament. Um, Tri Brigade can get a little tricky, but Tri Brigade Zoo, which wasn't as good as Shizu Tearlament in its heyday, but Tri Brigade Zoo, another really tricky deck, but it's not as tricky. Shizu Tearlament is actually really tricky, right? And so if your opponent doesn't play around this card, they might just lose because they can make Baron de Flor on the fifth summon. They can easily play around Nibiru, but some people just forget this card exists when they play, right? Or some people just picked up the deck for the first time, or maybe they opened up a hand that they thought was really bad, and they're just trying to play through it, right? And the thing is you don't just because you see Tier Element. I see this happen a lot of times with players. They just get really discouraged, or they get just really distraught. This goes for any deck, right? Sword Soul, Runic, Elemental Hero, whatever deck you're bumping into. Don't get discouraged just by your opponent playing a card. Always think that you can win. Always believe in the power, friendship, part of the cards, etc. Right? But I understand it's cliche, but there's a reason it's cliche because it's real, right? But it's actually more real for a Shizu Tearlaments, right? Like, no offense to Floandri's player. I am a Floandri's player, so I can say this, right? It's a really simple strategy, especially if you open D Shifter. You just like summon Rabina, search Eaglin, summon Eaglin, search M-Pen, tribute those two off, summon M-Pen, um, activate Eaglin, search the field spell, use the field spell, reveal Eaglin, banish Eaglin, go get the one that adds, I forget its name, but adds the banish zone, summon that one out, add that one for the banish zone, um, add Eaglin, we'll just add Eaglin, I guess, who cares, use Rabina's effect, play around it, that has nothing banished. That's not that great. But it's still like that's fine. That's whatever. Because then during our opponent's turn, when they normal summon, well, first off they're playing under M Pen, right? But when they normal summon, we can use the field spells effect to either normal summon Rabina and search out the barrier statue, and normal summon the barrier statue, which I don't have this on here. The barrier statues do actually do really well against Ishizu Tearlaments because that deck relies a lot on special summoning. Um, and barrier statues just say no. All of them do. Or Fossil Dyna, that's another card that's not up here that is also really good. I mean, honestly, the next cards we're going to talk about, you can tell. Summon Breaker, Summon Limit, right? But anyway, or we go get like Ryza and like the thing is with the Floandries deck that I was just talking about, like that's a very simple deck to play with all due respect to Floandries players. And Shizu Tearlaments is not that simple to play, right? So what you can do is you can actually end up winning duels because your opponent just misplays because they don't activate effects at the time that they should be activating, or they do activate effects at the time that they shouldn't be activating them, right? Or they summon the wrong monster in, or they put the wrong monster in the wrong zone, or they summon the wrong Xyz monster, summon the wrong Synchro monster. Like there's a lot of different interactions and spots where your opponent can mess up, right? And in a really good way to make your opponent mess up is this or these, right? There's another one that comes to mind. This card just recently went to 3. I should have pulled this card up already, but it's not super bad against this card. But this is another card like Skill Drain. Like, okay, now you don't get to activate any of your effects on the field. You don't get to activate any of your effects. Yeah, they have to activate in the graveyard. Soul Drain's another card, but that's another card, like I said, shuts down the graveyard. Really, though, you want to stop summoning. You want to stop them from summoning. That's really the main, because a lot of people, they look at tier elements and they see them mill 15 cards in one turn and go, oh, this is a milling based deck, let's turn off the graveyard, which is true. If you turn off the graveyard by either making all cards be banished or by just shutting off the graveyard with a card like Silent Graveyard, Abyss Dweller, Skullmeister, etc., Ghost Bell, that's another card, right? You're in a good spot, right? But they can still do things because that's actually not what the deck is trying to do. What the deck is trying to do is spam cards out on the board so they can make like Time Thief Redoer or Abyss Dweller or Braguska, right, and move forward. And the thing is, with Time Thief Redoer, Abyss Dweller, Braguska, I'm pretty sure unless Time Thief Redoer is a fiend, those are all different types. Baguska's a fiend. Abyss Dweller is a sea serpent, if I'm remembering correctly. And we'll just look this up real quick. Time Thief, most of the Time Thieves are psychics, right? And Time Thief Redoer, which is actually, no, we should just scroll right past it, is a psychic, right? Baron de Fleur, is that a plant? What is Baron? I think Baron de Fleur is a plant. Zeus is a machine, though. A lot of times this deck can make Zeus, right? Zeus is a machine. If they're not playing, Baron de Fleur is a warrior, right? They are playing a good amount of warriors, but their fusion monsters are warriors, or they're fiends, or they're aquas. So Rivalry of the Warlord is actually really quality against it. Now, Gozen Match kind of comes into play there too. And the thing is with Rivalry and Gozen Match, I have Jalgan up here too. Because what does Jalgan say? Neither player can special summon monsters. If you can turn off special summoning and play underneath it, you're in a great spot. That's why I was thinking about a deck like Grand Maju. Because Grand Maju usually runs like 60 cards, 2 Pie Desires. We're running the Storm Castle with the Castle of the Stormbridge. Running Banisher of the Radiance, Dimension Fissure, Macrocosmos. We're just trying to banish everything that we see. So that already helps. But they also usually Grand Maju also runs Summon Limit or Rivalry of the Warlords because they really just are trying to summon a 9,000 attack Grand Maju monster. And I know you're like, there's no way Grand Maju is good against tier elements. It actually is. A well-built Grand Maju deck actually is. Right? And the reason for that is because going second, for sure, you're not really in the best spot because they have some really relevant trap cards because they can turn your graveyard off too with the Gravekeeper's Trap that we actually featured on the Penny Stock Marker Watch on Sunday. And if you don't open Dark Rule No More or Wing Dragon Raw Sphere mode, you're kind of SOL, right? But then there's always this, right? And this card, we all hated this card for the longest time, but this card realistically is the best card against Ishizu Tier Element. And the reason for that is because it punishes our opponents for doing anything, right? Or summoning a bunch of monsters. Like I said, it is a very strong strategy. If you win the die roll, you're still not going to be in a great spot unless you see your floodgates that I was talking about here today. And maybe there's a floodgate that you thought of when I made a comment that could work out really well. If there was, please let me know in the comments down below. Do keep in mind, though, that it's not the easiest tier 0 strategy that we have. Like Dragon Rulers, one of the first tiers. That was a relatively easy strategy to play. This is not one of those strategies. This has a lot of weird interaction cards. Now, something worth noting, I actually saw this on the DB Grinders channel, so I'm just shouting out everybody, right? And I actually referenced another deck that's like this, but I actually saw Ishizu Infernoid. Now, Infernoids are interesting because they do banish cards from the graveyard, but that's not why I'm talking about this card deck. I'm talking about this deck because any deck that wants to use the graveyard as well is good against tier elements. And I think that's why we saw so many tier element strategies at YCS Pasadena. It wasn't just because tier elements is the best deck, but it's also because tier elements is the best counter to tier elements, right? Like, it sounds weird, right? No, how does a deck counter itself, right? It does because a lot of the tier element cards mill from both players' decks, right? And so if you're running a deck that doesn't want that to happen, you might be in a bad spot. But if you're playing a deck like Infernoids or Light Swarm or Burning Abyss or Phantom Knights, Salamangreat kind of does too. Like, there's actually a lot of strategies. Like I said, since the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh, that focus on their graveyard. Now I will say this: if you are playing one of those strategies, you're playing a worse version of a milling deck, right? But that might make your opponent a little apprehensive if they activate their, Ishizu cards, if they activate their Tearlament card, and they make you mill 5 of your own cards, and you just activate like 5 effects off of those cards. That could be kind of huge, right? But let me know what you guys think. What are the best cards to side deck against Ishizu Tearlament? Let me know in those comments down below. Make sure you guys click that like button to show your support for the channel, subscribe, and check out other content on this channel. But most importantly of all, have a good day.